In May of 2026, 7 men walked into a cave in the hills of central Laos looking for gold. They had done this before. They knew these hills. They knew this cave, or at least they thought they did. They carried their tools. They squeezed through an entrance barely wide enough for one person at a time. They descended at a 45-degree angle into the limestone dark. And then, the monsoon rains came. The cave entrance filled with water in minutes. The exit they had walked in through was gone. 6 men were trapped somewhere inside a flooded underground labyrinth in one of the most remote and inaccessible parts of Southeast Asia. One man had made it out just in time. He ran. He found help. He raised the alarm. What followed over the next 18 days was one of the most dramatic cave rescue operations since Thailand in 2018. International teams flew in from Finland, Australia, Malaysia, Thailand. Massive pumps were airlifted to a site that had no roads. A 23-year-old man with no diving experience was taught to breathe underwater inside a flooded cave, guided through zero-visibility water by a stranger, and then emerged into daylight to cheers from a rescue team that had not slept properly in days. 4 other men walked out on their own, covered in mud after 10 days without food, and 2 men did not come back at all. The rescue operation was called off on June 6, 2026. An earthquake had struck the area. The cave entrance had partially collapsed. The structure was unstable. The divers who had already pushed their bodies and their courage to the absolute limit had to walk away, knowing that somewhere inside the limestone, 2 people were still there. Their families are still waiting. This is the full story of the 2026 Laos cave rescue. The men who went in looking for gold, the 10 days of darkness and hunger, the international team that flew to the middle of nowhere to save strangers, the 1 man who learned to dive inside a cave, the 4 who walked out on their own, the 2 who did not come home, and the comparison that the whole world is making to the cave in Thailand in 2018, where 12 boys and their football coach went in, and every single one of them came out alive. And that comparison matters, because it was the same type of cave, the same monsoon floods, the same international rescue divers, including one Finnish diver who was there in 2018 and said the Laos cave was more frightening than anything he had experienced in Thailand. Same situation, very different ending. This is why. But to understand the Laos cave rescue, you have to understand what Laos is and where this cave sits within it. Laos is a landlocked country in Southeast Asia, bordered by China to the north, Vietnam to the east, Cambodia to the south, Thailand to the west, and Myanmar in the northwest. It is one of the least densely populated countries in Asia, and one of the poorest. The economy is largely agricultural. In rural areas, many families live on subsistence farming, fishing, and whatever they can earn from the land or the mountains around them. The province of Zaisambam sits in the central highlands of the country. It is remote in a way that the word remote struggles to capture. To reach the cave site from the capital, Vientiane, about 120 kilometers away, you would drive for hours on roads that monsoon rains have turned to mud. Then, you would need a helicopter. CNN's team on the ground described their journey. A 45-minute helicopter flight, a 30-minute drive, and then a hike across rugged terrain. The landscape is limestone. The hills are riddled with caves, the natural result of millions of years of rainwater carving through soluble rock. Laos has hundreds of cave systems. Some mapped, many not. They range from tourist attractions to unmarked tunnels that only locals know exist. The town closest to the rescue site is Long Tieng. Now, if that name sounds familiar, there's a reason. Long Tieng was the secret headquarters of the CIA during the 1960s and 1970s, the nerve center of America's covert war in Laos. During that conflict, Laos became the most heavily bombed country per capita in history. Millions of unexploded bombs still litter the countryside. The remote hills around Long Tieng where local men still walk into unmapped caves searching for gold, are hills that were once used by the CIA and bombed from the air within living memory. Now, the cave system where the 7 men entered on May 19, 2026, sits in the foothills of a mining project near Longtiang. It is a limestone structure, the same kind of rock that makes the Thai cave system so complex and so dangerous. The cave entrance was barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. The route inside dropped immediately at a 45-degree angle, and the passages inside, as the rescuers would discover, narrowed in some places to just 60 centimeters, roughly the width of a refrigerator door. This is not a cave that tourists visit. This is not a cave that anyone maps. This is a cave that poor men go into hoping to come out richer. And that is how this story begins. 7 men. 8 if you count the one who got out. Their full names have not all been publicly reported. In much of the coverage of this story, the men are referred to by first name only, or in some cases, not named at all. This is partly a matter of how local reporting works in Laos, partly a matter of the remote and informal nature of their community. But the details that have emerged tell a story of ordinary people trying to survive in an extraordinary landscape. The man we know most about is Mued Duangsumdi. He was 23 years old. He was the first to be rescued from the cave, the one who was taught to scuba dive inside a flooded underground tunnel and guided out through water so murky that the Australian rescue diver Josh Richards described his visibility as comparable to coffee. When Mued came out, there were cheers on the surface. He emerged caked in mud, wearing an oxygen mask. His skin had developed blisters from days in the damp. His stomach ached with hunger. When reporters asked him later what he had been thinking about in the cave while the water rose and the darkness held him, his answer was immediate. He said he had only thought about one thing, quote, "I only thought I want to eat. I want to eat raw beef with spicy dip. I had to have it," end quote. He was 23 years old. He had been underground for 10 days without food, and the thing his mind was fixed on was a specific meal. Raw beef with spicy dip. That detail tells you more about the state of a man's mind after 10 days in a cave than any clinical description of stress response ever could. He explained how the group had entered the cave. They were villagers, he said. They went into the mountains to make a living. They had heard there was gold in this cave. They had found gold somewhere else before, so they went in looking for it. Then the cave flooded, Mued said, and we couldn't get back out. Among the group was another man named Mi, who became the subject of a separate CNN account. Mi was the informal leader of the 5 men who were located together on the elevated ledge deep inside the cave. He was the one who had kept the group's morale from collapsing. When CNN's correspondent described what the divers found when they first reached the men, 5 people huddled in near darkness on a ledge, illuminated only by the headlamps of the approaching rescuers. It was me whose composure stood out. Another man who survived, whose account was captured on video by rescue divers, said simply, quote, "I thought I would be dead. I didn't think there would be people helping us." One man was suffering from chest pain and continuous coughing. The damp, cold, confined environment had taken a physical toll that became more serious as the days passed. The group had very little food, a small amount of clean water in bottles. The cave air was not toxic. An elevated ledge with continuous airflow had kept them alive, but that airflow could not substitute for food or warmth or light. And then there were the 2 other men, different from the 5. According to Mued and others, they had entered the cave a day or 2 earlier, separately from the group of 5 that were eventually found alive. They had entered through a different part of the cave system. The 5 rescued men never encountered them underground. They may have gone deeper. They may have been in a different chamber entirely. They may have been trying to exit through a different route when the flood came. Their families held a vigil at the rescue base while the operation was underway. They waited through the days of pumping, the dives, The earthquake, the monsoon rains, the collapsed entrance. They were still waiting when the rescue operation was officially called off on June 6th. 2 men, unnamed in most of the international coverage, somewhere in a limestone cave in the hills above Long Tieng. Still there. Now, before we talk about the rescue, we need to talk about the gold. Because the gold is not a background detail. It is the reason 7 men were underground. It is the reason they went into a cave that nobody had mapped. It is the reason their families were left waiting on a hillside in central Laos while international teams of divers tried to bring them home. Laos has mineral wealth. The country sits atop significant deposits of gold, copper, tin, and other metals. Mining, both formal and informal, is a significant part of the rural economy in certain regions. In areas where formal employment is scarce and farming provides a subsistence income at best, the mountains offer an alternative. People go into the hills. They go into the caves. They look for signs of gold deposits in the rock formations. And when they find it, they extract what they can and sell it. This is not legal in the formal sense. The men who entered the cave on May 19th were described in international reporting as illegal gold miners. But that framing requires some context. In a country where poverty drives many families to survive on informal economies, the line between illegal activity and subsistence survival is not always a clear moral line. These were not international mining corporations stripping mountains for profit. These were villagers going into a cave with prospecting tools hoping to earn some money. Ued described it plainly, quote, "We're villagers. We go into the mountains to make a living. We heard there was gold, so we went in looking for it." He said they had found gold in another cave before. That previous success was the evidence that gave them confidence in the decision. It had worked once. Why would it not work again? The cave they chose on May 19th sits in the foothills of a mining project. The area around Long Tieng has been associated with mineral extraction for decades. The hills are not unknown territory to the local community. They hike through them, they work in them, they know certain caves by local name. What they do not have are detailed cave maps. What they do not have is an understanding of exactly how far the cave goes, how it branches, where water collects, and how quickly a flash flood can block every exit. What also matters for this story is that an informal mining economy has expanded across parts of Laos in recent years, particularly in remote limestone and river basin regions where formal livelihoods are scarce and enforcement of regulations is limited. The news organization that covered the rescue most deeply noted that this incident highlights an ongoing problem. Driven by poverty, locals often enter unmapped tunnels to search for gold without safety equipment, without communication devices, and without anyone above ground who knows exactly where they are. And that last point is the most dangerous of all. Because when the flash flood came on May 19th, 2026, and the cave entrance filled with water and the exit was blocked, nobody on the surface knew exactly where in that cave system the men were. May 19th, 2026, morning. The men hike 2.4 miles, approximately 4 kilometers through mountainous terrain to reach the cave. The terrain is steep. The roads in this area are mud tracks at the best of times. This is the start of monsoon season in central Laos, which means the ground is already saturated and the sky is unpredictable. But the morning is passable. The men carry their prospecting tools. They reach the cave entrance, the narrow opening that a person has to squeeze through one at a time. They go in. The cave drops immediately at a 45-degree angle. Now, for people who have been here before, the route is known in a way that local knowledge is known. Not mapped, not documented, but held in memory. The tunnels are dark. Headlamps illuminate the way. The passage is narrow and widen and narrow again. The rock is wet limestone, slick in places. The air is cool underground. Somewhere deep inside, perhaps 300 meters from the entrance, there's a ledge, an elevated section above the cave floor, a place where, if the water rises, a person might survive. At some point during the day, The exact timeline is not publicly confirmed. The monsoon rains begin. Not a drizzle, not a shower. Monsoon rain in Southeast Asia can be overwhelming in its speed and volume. Torrential downpours flood river basins, wash out roads, and crucially, flow downhill into cave systems. The limestone hills above this cave act like a funnel. Rainwater pours into the rock, finds the cracks, and rushes through the cave system in the form of underground flash floods. The cave entrance filled with water. The men could not get out. Fortunately, and this single word fortunately is doing enormous work in this sentence, one man made it to the entrance before the flood reached critical depth. He felt the water rising. He moved faster than the others. He squeezed through the narrowing passage and got out. He was wet, he was shaken, and then he ran. He ran through the mountainous terrain back toward Longtiang, and he reported what had happened to the authorities. Without him, nobody on the surface would have known the men were trapped. There was no communication device in the cave, no phone signal, no emergency beacon. 6 men underground with rising water, and only one person on the surface who knew where they were. The alarm was raised, and the rescue operation began. 10 days. That is how long the 5 men who were eventually found alive spent underground before the first rescuer reached them on May 27th. 10 days in a limestone cave with no daylight, no food beyond what they had brought in, which was not much because they had planned to be inside for a day, not a week and a half. A small amount of clean water in bottles. The water in the cave itself was murky, contaminated with whatever the flood had carried in from the surface. Their skin began to break out in the permanent damp. One man developed blisters. Another developed chest pain and would not stop coughing. Their muscles weakened from the cold and the inactivity. Their morale bent under the weight of not knowing. It was all dark, Wed said afterward. We didn't know days or nights. Think about that. The most fundamental rhythm of human existence, the cycle of light and dark that marks the passing of a day, was gone. Time became formless. The 10 days were not experienced as 10 days. They were experienced as an unbroken stretch of darkness in which sleep and waking blurred together, in which the men washed their clothes and slept and washed their clothes again because there was nothing else to do, in which hunger became a physical ache that took over the mind. Mued's mind fixed on raw beef with spicy dip. Others thought about their families. Me kept the group's spirits from breaking entirely. The cave's elevated ledge was their salvation in the most literal sense. It kept them above the floodwater. The ledge, according to the Lao news agency, also benefited from continuous airflow. That airflow was the difference between survival and suffocation. Without it, the oxygen in a sealed underground space would gradually be depleted by breathing. With it, the men had air. Not warmth, not food, not light, but air. On the 5th day, with no food left and strength draining away, one of the men spoke to a rescuer through a camera that was lowered into the cave. His message was raw with desperation. He said, quote, "If we don't get any food, we're out of strength. If we're still here after another 2 days, we'll be dead." End quote. He was not being dramatic. He was giving a medical assessment of his own body. 5 days without food at this level of stress and deprivation, in a cold, damp environment, with no ability to move freely, the human body begins to shut down systems. Not quickly, but the margin for error narrowing every day. On the 8th day, rescuers managed to pass food and medicine to the group through the flooded passages. The men were found alive, but severely weakened. The physical relief of eating something after 8 days underground is almost impossible to describe from the outside. For the men on that ledge in Laos, it was the difference between holding on and letting go. But they were still 300 meters inside a flooded cave, still surrounded by murky water in passages that dropped at steep angles, still requiring either a dive operation or a drain operation to get out, and the clock was still running. When the Laos government realized the scale of what it was dealing with, it did what the Thai government did in 2018. It called for help. International cave divers began arriving in the remote province of Xizangban, making the same arduous journey, helicopter, mud roads, hike, to reach a cave that had no established infrastructure, no prepared base camp, and no easy way to get heavy equipment to the entrance. Among the first to arrive was Finnish diver Mikko Pasi. Now, if you watch the Netflix documentary about the Thai cave rescue, or the film 13 Lives, directed by Ron Howard, you may recognize the role that Finnish and Scandinavian technical divers played in those operations. Pasi is part of that world. He is a veteran technical diving instructor and underwater explorer. He was involved in the 2018 Thai rescue. He knows what it means to enter a cave where people are dying and try to bring them out. He arrived at the Laos cave site and went in for reconnaissance. What he found was different from Thailand in ways that alarmed even him. He told CNN directly, quote, "I was more scared in this. It's very claustrophobic. If claustrophobia would be a thing, that would be it," end quote. And Pasi has been inside the Plura Cave in Norway, one of the most demanding sump dives in the world. He is not easily frightened. The passages in this Laos cave were unlike anything that he had encountered in a rescue context. He described having to push through, quote, "a couple of 100 meters of constant restriction," end quote. In places, the route narrowed to 60 centimeters, roughly the width of a refrigerator. Not the height of a refrigerator, the width. A person has to lie flat and wriggle sideways using elbows and knees, scraping through rock, through water, through darkness, while carrying diving equipment. Australian diver Josh Richards described the water inside the cave as resembling coffee, not because it was warm or inviting, but because it was so opaque with silt and sediment that visibility was effectively zero. Couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. You navigate by touch, by guideline, by experience, and by the confidence that the route that you came in on is the route that you can get out on. Richards, speaking to the ABC before flying in, said the cave footage that Pasi had shared looked, quote, "scary as hell," end quote. He said, now quoting again, "The stuff that Mikko has shared via video should scare anybody who watches it." And he flew in anyway. The multinational team that assembled at the Laos cave site over the following days included Melanesian diver Lee Kian Lee, Thai specialist cave diver Nurased Palasing, Robin Cuesta, and members of the Thai volunteer rescue group Meta Tam Rescue Kalasin, led by Kenkash Bangkawang. Volunteers came from across Southeast Asia and beyond. Like 2018, the rescue operation drew expertise from multiple countries because no single country's rescue service had everything that was needed. Unlike 2018, this cave had no existing road to the entrance, no established infrastructure. The helicopter flights were the only realistic way to get people and equipment to the site quickly. Large pumps were airlifted in and carried over terrain to begin draining the floodwater. Multiple pumps were positioned at different points to maximize drainage efficiency. It was a constant battle between the pumps and the ongoing monsoon rains, which kept replenishing the water that the pumps were trying to remove. Kenkash Bangkawang, coordinating the Thai rescue group, described what the men were facing. The route they used to enter had chambers along the way where a person could stop and rest. The survivors knew this. When the water rose, they had retreated to the elevated chamber with airflow. That knowledge, gained from their experience as locals who had been in this cave before, had kept them alive. But getting them out was another matter entirely. The rescue team's options were drain the cave enough that the men could crawl out on their own, or conduct a dive operation that would guide the men through flooded passages that they had no training to navigate. Now, both were attempted, and both were, in their own way, successful. And the way those two options played out over the following days is one of the most extraordinary sequences in the entire story. On Friday, May 29th, the rescue team made a decision. 5 days of pumping had not drained the cave enough for the men to walk out. The water was still too high in critical sections of the route. The monsoon forecast was threatening. Another heavy rain event would refill the cave and potentially set the entire operation back by days. The men's physical condition was deteriorating. The decision was made to attempt a diving extraction for the first man. There was one fundamental problem with this decision. None of the trapped men had any prior diving experience. None of them had ever put on a diving mask. None of them had ever breathed through a regulator. None of them had ever spent a single minute underwater breathing compressed air. And now, one of them was being asked to navigate flooded, zero-visibility cave passages through water that looked like coffee, guided by a rescuer that he had met hours ago in a language that he may not have fully understood, after 10 days without food. Inside the cave, in the dark, in the water, the divers gave the men a tutorial. Nurased Palasing and Miko Pasai crouched on the ledge beside the weakened miners, demonstrating how to manage oxygen tanks, how to use breathing apparatus, how to breathe from a regulator, how to stay calm when cold, opaque water closes over your head and you can't see anything and every instinct in your body is telling you to panic. This is not a quick lesson. In normal circumstances, open water diving training takes days of classroom instruction, pool practice, and supervised shallow water sessions before a student is taken anywhere near challenging conditions. There are no normal circumstances inside a flooded cave in central Laos after 10 days of starvation and confinement. The first man chosen to attempt the extraction was Mued Duangsamdi. Mued later described what it was like when the two divers with headlamps appeared from beneath the water. He said that he thought he would be dead. He had not believed that people were coming. Then, suddenly, two humans emerged from the water in front of him. And the darkness that had held him for 10 days cracked open with the possibility of survival. On Friday, May 29th, Mued Duangsamdi entered the water. He was guided out through murky, zero-visibility passages, through flooded sections that dropped at steep angles, through the 60-centimeter restrictions where a person has to turn sideways just to fit through the darkness. Guided by touch, by the line, by a diver who held him and communicated through the physical language of underwater movement. He reached the cave mouth. He emerged into daylight. Cheers. From the rescue team, from the volunteers, from everyone who had been waiting at the surface. A 23-year-old Lao villager who had never dived in his life, who had been underground for 10 days without food, who had been taught to breathe underwater inside a flooded cave, was out. The first man was home. Now, after Mued was safely extracted on Friday, the team prepared to conduct dive extractions for the remaining 4 men on Saturday. Emergency pumping had run through the night. The pumps were repositioned for greater efficiency. The cave was being drained faster than at any point in the operation. And then, Saturday morning arrived, and Josh Richards was gearing up to go into the cave to deliver food and medicine in preparation for the next extraction. And 4 very muddy miners walked out on their own. "I was literally about to head into the cave myself," Richards told CNN. He continued, quote, "when all of a sudden we heard all these cheers and spun around, and 4 very muddy miners just suddenly emerged from the cave," end quote. They had noticed. The water level had dropped far enough overnight that the flooded sections were no longer impassable. They had looked at the route that they had been told was still too dangerous, and they had decided to go for it. Miko Pasai had joked during the pumping operations that if the pumps worked well enough, the divers might not be needed. The team had been preparing to conduct one of the most challenging dive extractions in recent memory, and the men had gotten tired of waiting and walked out. Pasai described it as the best outcome. It was the best outcome because the pumping was always the plan and is the safest way where nobody's going to get into a risk, he said. He continues, quote, "So we're happy that we didn't have to go anymore and the pumps worked," end quote. 5 men were now out. Mued by guided diving extraction. 4 by their own determination and the fortunate timing of the pumps. Photographs showed them emerging from the cave caked in mud, wearing oxygen masks and foil blankets. Medical teams were immediately at their side. They were taken to the nearest hospital. Lee Kian Lee, the Melanesian diver, told reporters that they were doing well. But the celebration was incomplete, because 2 men were still in the cave. The 2 missing men were different from the 5 who were found alive. According to Mued, they had entered the cave a day or 2 earlier, before the group of 5. They had gone in through a different entrance, or deeper into the same system. The 5 survivors never crossed paths with them underground, which means somewhere further inside that cave, beyond the sections that the divers had already penetrated, beyond the ledge where the 5 men had survived, somewhere in the deeper parts of a limestone system that had never been fully mapped, 2 people were either trapped or gone. The rescue team began working to find them. Robin Cuesta, one of the divers, told ABC News that a search team planned to rappel down a newly discovered 196-foot shaft, approximately 60 meters deep, in hopes that it would lead to a chamber where the 2 missing men might be located. Josh Richards, describing the situation on Sunday, said that there was one place in the cave system that the divers had not yet checked. A passage, now quoting, significantly further on, another 100 meters or so, through a fairly lethal passage, end quote. That was even tighter and more unpleasant than what they had already traversed. He called it the only place that the 2 missing men could realistically still be alive. Then, something extraordinary happened that briefly revived hope. Rescuers heard a knocking sound. Kengkaj Bongkawong, coordinating the Thai rescue group, wrote on Facebook, quote, "Yesterday, when we knocked, there was a signal responding back. It was a knocking sound meant to be heard. Based on our initial assessment, this is considered not to be a reflection or an echo of the sound, a knock from somewhere inside the cave, a response to the rescuer's own knocking. If that was a human being, alive and knocking back, then somewhere in the depths of that unmapped limestone system, 2 people were still holding on. The team intensified their efforts. LiDAR scanning was deployed, laser scanning technology that maps the interior structure of rock formations without entering them. Satellite imagery was used to analyze the mountain structure. Rescuers were using every tool available to find a way through or around the flooded passages. And then, the earthquake struck. On a Wednesday in early June, a 4.2 magnitude earthquake hit the area. Cave systems in limestone are structurally sensitive. An earthquake does not have to be powerful to affect a cave. The vibration travels through the rock. Passages shift. Sections that were stable become unstable. And critically, the cave entrance collapsed. The entrance that the divers had been using to enter and exit the system was now compromised. Part of it had physically fallen in. The structure of the cave had changed in a way that made it uncertain whether any passage that had previously been viable was still viable. Chakrit Tangtong, a Thai rescue member, said, quote, "The mission was already difficult, and now it has become even more challenging," end quote. The rescue operation suspended diving while the team assessed the new structural reality. Pumping continued, but the earthquake had changed the calculus in a fundamental way. On June 6, 2026, the official rescue operation was called off. The official statement cited the collapsed entrance and the ongoing instability of the cave structure. Sending more divers in risked adding to the death toll rather than reducing it. The operation that had already pushed extraordinary human beings to the edge of their physical capabilities could not be pushed further without creating new tragedies. Local volunteers continued pumping water from outside. But the experts who had come from around the world, the Finnish diver, the Australian, the Malaysian, the Thai teams, had to walk away. The families who had been holding a vigil at the rescue base were still there when the operation ended. The 2 men are still in the cave. Now let us talk about 2018, because the shadow of the Thai cave rescue falls over the entire Laos story in ways that are both obvious and complicated. June 23, 2018, northern Thailand. 12 members of the Wild Boars youth football team aged 11 to 16 and their 25-year-old assistant coach Ekapal Chantawong entered the Tam Luang Nangnon cave in Chiang Rai province after football practice. It was supposed to be a short adventure. Some accounts say they were celebrating the birthday of one of the boys. They rode their bicycles to the cave entrance, left their bikes and shoes outside, and went in. Monsoon rains came. The cave flooded, and the entrance was blocked. They did not come out. For 9 days, nobody on the surface knew whether the 13 people inside were alive or dead. British cave divers Rick Stanton and John Valanthin, two of the most experienced in the world, were called in. After an extraordinary dive of several kilometers into the cave system, pushing through murky water and tight passages, they found the boys and their coach alive on July 2nd, huddled on an elevated shelf of rock called Nern Nam Sao, approximately 2.5 miles inside the mountain. What followed was one of the most complicated and debated rescue operations in history. The water could not be drained fast enough. The boys had no diving experience. Passages were too narrow and dangerous for untrained people to navigate without sedation. So the decision was made, controversially at the time, to administer anesthetic to the boys and carry them out while unconscious, managed by medical divers. One man died during the operation. Samarn Kunan, a Thai Navy SEAL diver, ran out of oxygen while placing spare tanks along the rescue route. He died serving a mission to bring children home. 18 days after they entered, all 13, the 12 boys and their coach, were out. The world erupted in celebration. The operation was called a miracle. It was studied by military organizations, rescue services, and cave diving communities worldwide. The Netflix documentary, the Ron Howard film, the global media coverage. The wild boars became symbols of hope. Now, compare the two. The similarities are immediate and obvious. Both Southeast Asia, both monsoon flooding, both untrained civilians trapped underground, both international teams of cave divers, both pumping operations, both the use of scuba equipment for non-divers, both Finnish divers on the team, and both communities mobilizing across borders. But the differences are what make the Laos story its own tragedy, rather than just a retelling of Thailand. The first difference is who was trapped. In Thailand, it was children, 11 to 16 years old, plus a 25-year-old coach. The emotional weight of that, the innocence, the youth, the school team that just wanted to see a cave after practice, galvanized the entire planet. The Laos story involved adult men who made a choice to enter an unmapped cave for economic reasons that are deeply understandable when you understand the circumstances, but don't carry the same emotional charge as a children's football team. Now, the second difference is the cave itself. Miko Pasai, who was in both, said that the Laos cave was more frightening than Thailand, more claustrophobic. The passages in Laos were tighter, the restrictions more sustained, the environment more physically demanding for the rescuers. In Thailand, the cave was complex and the distances were enormous, but in certain sections there was space to maneuver. In Laos, the route forced rescuers to wriggle like worms through 60-centimeter restrictions for hundreds of meters. The third difference is the outcome. Thailand was complete. Every person came out. The world got its miracle. The Laos rescue ended with 2 people still underground and an earthquake that made further searching impossible. The fourth difference is coverage. The Thai rescue dominated global media for 18 days. Every news organization on Earth had correspondents at the cave. The Laos rescue was significant international news, but it did not reach the same saturation, partly because the men were adults, partly because the story resolved faster in some ways, and partly because the world has a limited capacity to sustain that level of collective attention. And yet, the Laos rescue deserves to be remembered with the same gravity. The same extraordinary courage was present in both. The same willingness of people from different countries to risk their own lives for strangers that they had never met. The same physicality of cave diving under conditions that most humans could not imagine. The same families waiting in uncertainty for news of people that they loved. The difference in outcome does not diminish the effort. Now let us spend time with the rescuers. Because in both the Thai rescue and the Laos rescue, the people who went into the cave after strangers they're the quiet center of the story. Mikko Pasai, Finnish, a veteran technical diving instructor, involved in Tam Luang in 2018, arrived in Laos and described the cave as the most claustrophobic place he had ever been. Crawled through hundreds of meters of constant restriction in zero visibility water, crouched on a ledge inside a flooded cave, and taught a 23-year-old Lao villager how to breathe underwater. Did not hesitate, did not turn back. After the 5 were rescued, when asked about the 2 still missing, he said that there was a narrow crack in one of the chambers that could lead to a deeper section, and that this was the only place they had not yet checked. He was ready to go back in. Josh Richards, Australian, based in Adelaide, flew to Laos on a few hours' notice after Pasai shared video footage of the cave. Described that footage as looking quote-unquote scary as hell. Boarded the plane, arrived at a remote site accessible only by helicopter, descended into a cave that he had never seen before, carrying equipment through mud roads that barely existed. Was gearing up to go back in on Saturday morning when 4 miners walked out. He said he was quote-unquote relieved they were out. Not disappointed to be spared the dive, just relieved. Nurased Palasang, Thai, a specialist cave diver, one of the men who delivered the news to the trapped miners that help had arrived, who illuminated their ledge with a headlamp after 10 days of darkness, who, alongside Pasai, gave Mued his dive tutorial, who guided Mued through the coffee-colored water and out into daylight. Lee Kian Lai, Malaysian, the diver managing the dive operations on the ground, coordinating between the technical teams and the local authorities, communicating updates to the media while simultaneously planning the next phase of an operation that was changing every hour. Kengkaj Bongkawang, Thai, the head of the rescue group Meta Tam Rescue Kalasin, the person posting updates to Facebook at 3 in the morning so that the families at the vigil would know what was happening, the person who wrote about the knocking sound and what it might mean, who said, moving forward, it won't just be a matter of sitting around waiting for water to be pumped out, end quote. Robin Cuesta, diver, rappelling down a newly discovered 196-foot shaft in search of 2 men who might be alive in a space, quote, through a fairly lethal passage, end quote. These are the people who go into the caves when the caves take someone. They do it for strangers. They do it in conditions that would break most people before they've even reached the entrance. And they do it not because they're fearless. Pasai said explicitly that he was more scared in Laos than he was in Thailand, but because the fear does not stop them. Now, if you've watched our previous videos on this channel, you know that we covered the Maldives cave diving disaster of May 2026, an incident that happened just days before the Laos rescue began. 5 divers entered an underwater cave in Vabu Atoll on May 14, 2026. They were experienced. They had permits. They had logged thousands of dives between them. And they never came back. Maldivian military diver died trying to reach them. Finnish technical cave divers, part of the same small international community of specialists, were mobilized to recover the bodies. The Laos rescue began 5 days later on May 19th. In the same month, in the same part of the world, the same type of specialists, Finnish technical divers with rebreathers and underwater scooters, were deployed to 2 cave emergencies simultaneously. The Maldives was a recovery. Laos was a rescue. In the Maldives, nobody came back alive. In Laos, 5 came back. Mikko Pasai, who was part of the Laos rescue, is connected to the same international community as Sami Pakarinen and Patrick Gronqvist, who were part of the Maldives recovery. These people know each other. They train together. They respond to the same calls. And the parallel between the 2 stories extends further. In the Maldives, the divers who died were experienced. They knew what caves could do. They entered anyway, without the right equipment, without a guideline, without the safeguards that cave diving demands. In Laos, the men who went underground were poor villagers looking for gold. They had no cave diving training, no communication equipment, no emergency plan. they entered a cave that nobody had mapped. Two very different groups of people, two very different motivations, and the same fundamental outcome. A cave took them, and the world had to send specialists to try to bring them back. The question that connects both stories, and also connects 2018 and 2026, is why? Why do people keep entering environments that are this dangerous? And the answer is not simple. For the Italian divers, it appears to have been a combination of experience, curiosity, and a normalization of risk that comes from years of successful diving. For the Lao miners, it was poverty and the hope that gold in an unmapped cave might somehow change their family's circumstances. But caves are indifferent to the reasons. They apply the same rules, whether the person entering them is a decorated marine researcher or a villager with a headlamp and a prospecting tool. The Laos cave rescue highlights a problem that will not be solved by one rescue operation, no matter how extraordinary. In rural Laos, an informal mining economy has expanded in recent years. The country has mineral wealth, but limited formal employment in its rural regions. People who need income go into the mountains. They go into the caves. They look for gold, for tin, for whatever the earth might give them. They go in without maps, without communication devices, without safety equipment, without anyone who knows exactly where inside the cave they are going. This was not the first time that something like this has happened in Laos, and it will not be the last. The caves and limestone highlands are numerous, unmapped, and unpredictable during monsoon season. The people who enter them are not reckless. They're poor. They're doing what their circumstances have required them to do. And when the rains come and the cave floods, as caves and monsoon zones inevitably do during monsoon season, there is no system in place to save them. The heroes of the 2026 Laos rescue flew in from Finland, Australia, Malaysia, Thailand. They came because the international community of cave specialists responded to a call. But that response is not a system. It is individual heroism from a small group of people who just happen to have the skills and the willingness to enter the most dangerous environments on Earth. What would a system look like? Cave mapping in known informal mining areas, communication devices as part of any underground operation, weather monitoring tied to specific cave systems, emergency protocols that do not depend on an international rescue operation being assembled from scratch each time that something goes wrong. But these things cost money. They require government attention in a country with limited resources and many competing priorities. They are not glamorous to implement. Nobody makes a documentary about cave mapping. But they might have found the 2 missing men, or prevented 7 from being trapped in the first place. Mued Dwangsamdi was discharged from the hospital in the days after the rescue. He gave interviews. He answered questions with the kind of directness that comes from someone who has been very close to dying and isn't interested in pretending otherwise. He said that he was thankful for everyone who helped him survive. And yes, he said he ate the raw beef with spicy dip. He was asked about the 2 missing men, the ones who had entered the cave before his group, who his group never found, who were still somewhere in the limestone system when he was brought out. Mued believed that they had entered through a different part of the cave. He said that his group did not cross paths with them underground. He said that he believed that they were in a different section. He didn't say more than that. There was nothing more to say. He was 23 years old. He went into a cave looking for gold. He spent 10 days in the dark without food. He was taught to scuba dive inside a flooded tunnel. He came out into daylight covered in mud, wearing a foil blanket, and the first thing that he wanted was raw beef with spicy dip. And he got it. He's alive. In 2018, a cave in Thailand took 13 people. The world watched for 18 days. Every single one of them came home. The world called it a miracle. In 2026, a cave in Laos took 7 people. The The world watched for 2 weeks. 5 came home and 2 did not. The difference in outcome does not make the Laos rescue any less extraordinary. The people who flew into that remote province, who wriggled through 60-centimeter passages for hundreds of meters in zero visibility water, who taught a man to breathe underwater in a flooded cave, who pumped water for days and nights without stopping, who heard a knocking sound and then went back in, those people are extraordinary by any measure of the word. And the men who came out, who survived 10 days without food in a limestone cave because they found a ledge with airflow and then held on, were extraordinary in a completely different way. Not trained, not equipped, not prepared for what happened, but still alive. Because they waited, because they trusted, because Moed went into the water with a stranger and breathed. But 2 families are still holding a vigil in the hills above Longtiang. 2 men went into a cave looking for gold, and they have not come back. The entrance has collapsed. The earthquake made the structure unstable. The official rescue operation has ended. Local volunteers continue to pump water from outside. The pumps run. The water rises and falls with the monsoon. And somewhere within the unmapped limestone of central Laos, the cave holds what it holds. The caves that take people do not look dangerous from the outside. They don't look like the mouths of traps or the entrances to a disaster. They look like holes in the ground. They look like geology. They look like an opportunity. And they are all of those things. And they are also, when the rains come and the water rises and the exit fills, something that no map has ever fully captured. Something that the light doesn't reach. Something that the best divers in the world sometimes can't get through. Something that sends people home and then sometimes does not. The 2026 Laos cave rescue is over. The 2 remaining men have not been found. The families are still waiting. And somewhere in the world right now, in Thailand, in Finland, in Australia, in Malaysia, the divers who went into that cave are back home, living ordinary lives, until the next call comes. And if it comes, they will go.